Welcome to Hosting Great Virtual Meetings. My name is Sylvia Chu, and I am the Consulting Director of Collective Impact with the Tamarack Institute. And I'm excited to introduce you to our guest presenter for today's webinar, Maggie Chumbley. And she's going to take us on a bit of a deep dive from her experience on what it takes to host a great virtual meeting. Maggie is a facilitator, an instructional designer, and someone who works with organizations and individuals to empower better decision-making, reinvigorate workplace culture, and create lasting and impactful initiatives. Maggie and I had the opportunity to meet and work together at the Liberating Structures Global Gathering back in Seattle in March. And I am excited to welcome you to a Tamarack webinar, Maggie.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Welcome.
Great to be here. My way back background is I was trained as a teacher, and so I from early in my career started learning a lot about how groups make meaning together and how they learn together and how they make decisions together. And so what has come about in my consulting work is part of what I do is I'm an expert on meetings and how people meet and the ways they do it and how often and how they structure and design and facilitate meetings. And it's something that I find can be really satisfying for folks, is that if they can change and improve the way they meet, they change the way their organizations operate. And I have also been noticing that more and more teams are meeting online, and more organizations are utilizing virtual spaces to get work done. And I have been delighted to be working more and more in the virtual space and supporting people to have great virtual meetings. So I'm excited to share what I've got today. Mm-hmm.
So many of us have been part of that not so great virtual meeting experience. What are some of the common challenges that you hear from people in terms of why online meetings don't work?
Yeah, great question. I'd say most folks I meet will say, I tried an online meeting and I didn't really like it. It was a little bit boring, or maybe we had a laptop in the room. And so there's a couple common things that I notice go wrong with virtual meetings. One is that there's a lack of good meeting design. I would wonder, Sylvia, if that meeting would have gone well, whether it was virtual or not, because the meeting wasn't designed well. It didn't have a clear purpose. Folks didn't know why they were there. There wasn't a clear agenda. There wasn't much structure beyond sitting around and having a conversation about what you were trying to do. So that's usually the kind of the bedrock reason I wonder, why did this go wrong? What happened? One of the other common things that can go wrong is that there's only passive participation opportunities. And so that's some of the things I'd like to show you and tell you about today, is that there's some pretty active ways to stay engaged in an online meeting. When I hold online meetings, I often say this is not a conference call and it's not a webinar. It is a meeting. And so it'll be rigorous. It will be highly engaging, and you can't do anything else. You can't make dinner. You can't shop online. You really have to attend to exactly what's happening. So having a lot of opportunities for participants to be moving virtual Post-it notes around or being polled is really important part of having lots of engagement. And then this last one is, little or unclear priming about what to expect. That's a common problem I've talked to a lot of clients about, is that they get everybody on their Zoom or their Skype call, and they thought it was something they could call in from the car, or they could, listen in while they're making dinner, and that's not what it is. And so getting really, really clear, and even doing maybe a pre-meeting call just so everybody knows how we're going to operate in the virtual space can be really helpful. So those are the common things that I think go wrong. It's just lack of good meeting design, and that can translate to folks not knowing what to expect, or that there's not a lot of opportunities to actively participate in what's happening.
I really like your distinction. Just because a meeting is bad and it happened online doesn't automatically mean it's because it was the virtual space, right? Mm-hmm. The same kind of rigor and thought that you would give to a face-to-face meeting in terms of the design and the structure need to be there. Mm-hmm. That's fabulous. I really enjoyed your recent blog around why I love virtual meetings. And I was struck by your comment about you actually prefer meeting virtually to meeting online. Can
Yeah,
you,
sometimes. Yeah.
and you actually made a comment, something like virtual meetings can function and perform in ways that in-person meetings can't even touch. So tell us a little bit more about that, because here's the flip side I hadn't really thought about, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about that, and we can practice that a little bit right now with folks on the webinar. So virtual meetings, there are some things that are possible. So consider this: in the virtual space, you're sitting by a computer. Not only do you have a keyboard, but you can access the web. And those are some pretty remarkable things immediately that aren't available to us when we're in live meetings. And when I say there's a keyboard, it means that everybody can quickly type their questions, they can quickly type their opinion. We can start to assign tasks. Everybody has the opportunity to make the spoken information visual in a chat box or on a shared Google document. We can use, there's two really important tools that I really use quite a bit in virtual meetings. The first one is Google Docs, and then in Mural, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later in the hour. You can record your work, and so just like now we're making a recording of this. You can not only have a written recording, you can have an actual video recording. And when I say getting work done together, you can all fill out a spreadsheet together. It can be a time that the work that maybe you go to a meeting and you say, okay, after this meeting, we're all going to do this. You could do it together right there. You could say, let's all populate the spreadsheet with our contacts or with the list of things to do. You can easily look at and update project management documents on a shared document. And then, of course, there's the obvious components of virtual meetings, like you can call in from different time zones and different locations, and it can be really empowering for folks who support others in rural locations where coming into the city to meet isn't a possibility. So those are some of the more obvious but exciting reasons that we can do. But let's try something out here. Those of us who are on the webinar who are on a computer and are watching this live, and Andrea, I see your question there about mixing participation. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But let's give this a try. The first question I want us to try, Duncan's going to write a question in there from me, and I just want everybody to write their quick response, their quick answer, and we're just going to get a quick informal poll from everybody on the call about what is their biggest challenge that you face right now in holding great virtual meetings. So take a look at that question and just start typing in your responses, and we'll see what kind of themes come out here.
So Maggie, immediately a couple of things come to mind. I would say about 80% of people have said something around engagement. So getting responses to questions, active participation, engagement, focus, things like that. That's, I would say, about 85% of the responses here. And on top of that, things like trying to find time, making sure they're not boring. Having people not accidentally speak over one another, things like that. But engagement seems to be the biggest one.
Yeah, thank you. Engagement is usually the biggest one that I come across with clients I work with who are looking for training and support on great virtual meetings. So about engagement, for instance, what we just did, putting a question out and everybody write back, and then having being able to see what the response is, and that's some engagement. You had to type in, you were asked a question, you had to be paying attention to what was happening in order to answer at the right time. Other things I can do to be more engaging is, instead of playing you a video, I can send you to YouTube and you watch it yourself, and then you can come back. So a lot of active interaction. Duncan and I were joking earlier that it's a little awkward that we're talking about meetings on a webinar platform, but we're going to do our best. I would have loved to show you these tools, but sending everybody to some of these tools, I think, would crash the tools. So we're just going to talk about them a little bit here. So yeah, that's my that's my kind of quick answer around what I love about virtual meetings is that honestly, there is just a lot of potential that with different tools like Google Docs and kind of editing documents together that can keep the engagement quite high. There's a tool we're going to talk about later, the Zoom video platform, and Zoom is quickly becoming a favorite platform for organizations because it has a feature of breakout rooms, and a breakout room means that we can put you in groups of 2 and groups of 4, and you can have one-on-one conversations for small bits of time, and that really changes the design of the meeting. And that's something that we can do in live meetings as well. I think some of the best in-person meetings, if you're in a group of 12, is you should always break into groups of 2 and 4 in order to kind of warm up, get familiar, sort your ideas, and come back together as a group.
Okay. Beautiful. So we've talked about, some of the things that are the biggest challenges for folks, but let's flip the coin and I'd love to have you weigh in on, from your experience, what some of the key success factors that you found are essential for designing and hosting an online meeting in particular.
Great, thank you. So let's look at that next. I'm moving around on my computer. It looks like, yeah, let's look at that next slide together. So a couple of key things that can really help with success. I'm glad to hear that some of the responses around the challenges are around engagement, just common challenges that I'm quite familiar with. Priming is a word that I would use to describe everything you were going to do before you actually have the meeting. So in some ways, it's like warming up the muscle that you're about to use cognitively, but it's also about logistics. So all of the things we do that help people get on the call and know what's going to happen. And we do this for live meetings as well. And for example, Tamarack Institute did some priming. They emailed us last week. They said the meeting's going to start in an hour. Those are all things you do to remind people this is the place, this is what's going to happen. Priming can also be things like, this is what we're going to discuss. Here's the agenda. This is what I want you to have prepared. Everything you want people to do on their own to really be ready for what's about to happen. You can also prime during the meeting. You can get people warmed up by having a pair share, or by ranking or looking at some provocative statements and ranking their sense of agreement or disagreement. There's lots of priming you can do before you're really doing the main event.
Would polls be a good example of that too, Maggie?
Yeah, I think polls can definitely be a good priming.
Okay.
Yeah. So it can be about the content, but it can be as simple as, this is how, here's the website, or, if you have a live meeting, it's about, this is how you get to the meeting room. This is where you park, all the things that people need so that they can arrive ready to go. And it's often skipped. I was chatting with a client who, she's having a really hard time making sure that her meeting participants know that it's an active meeting, again, that it's not a webinar. So just being really descriptive in your language. What people need to find a quiet place. They need headphones. They need to be in a place where they won't disturb others. So this might not be the best thing to do from a cubicle. You might want to book a room with your laptop. All of those little details that can help people new to doing this kind of work feel really successful. So there's some other roles and functions that I've noticed on online platforms that can be really helpful. Like today, Duncan is our technical facilitator. He is kind of in the background. He is there to capture questions, to put in questions. He was there, moving slides. And so I don't have to do that. I just get to be the expert facilitator. I get to tell you about the content. So I'm the content facilitator, and Sylvia is co-facilitator and the host, and then Duncan is the technical facilitator. So we have 3 people running this webinar. Don't be afraid to also have similar roles in a virtual meeting. You may find that having a technical facilitator is really helpful if you're going to push links through a chat box, or if you're going to support people who are having technical difficulties. It's really great to have a sidekick doing that kind of work. Some other things I've noticed, the cheat sheet. Right now, Duncan and I have a Google Doc open. That's all the questions I'm going to ask, so he can just cut and paste them, or all the links that I'm going to put in. When I have big links with documents, I shorten them using a link shortener so that the visual space is really tidy. So have a cheat sheet if you're the meeting facilitator, stuff that you're going to cut and paste. Don't just use slides as or an agenda necessarily as the place that that pushes the activity. A live blogger is kind of my label for somebody who takes notes in the chat, who writes down everything that's been said. It's like somebody taking minutes or actually capturing the important pieces. So that's a beautiful role, and that really boosts engagement if you can have folks writing down what they've decided or what they think needs to happen next. I use this a lot when I co-design meetings, and I ask the questions I've asked you. What was the biggest challenge that you're dealing with? What do you think is going to stand in our way? And if you can get everybody in the meeting to write down what they have to say, your discussion is going to get richer. You can also capture any kind of accountability, what people have signed up for, and it makes meeting minutes a snap if you can put in the chat box everything that happened, and then you can save that as a text file and look back. And then I'd say the last preparation piece for success is templates. So if you're going to send folks to Google Documents or Google Slides and let them edit, or send folks to Mural, which is an online whiteboarding function, you build templates, you build T-charts, and you build Kanban boards, and you build retrospective templates so that when folks arrive, they know exactly where to write their text or move their documents or move their post-it notes around. So that's some key prep I find I do. Depending on the meeting, I can do several hours of preparation in a lot of those online platforms so that when people arrive, they're interacting with a ready-to-go template activity.
Well, good. Before we go into that, because I know you're really keen to let us see and demo some of these tools that you've been referencing, I see that there's been a couple of questions coming up just in terms of unpacking some of our lingo. So before we dive into those tools, maybe we can do that. So the first one from Kate is, what do you mean by a poll as a primer? That was the first question.
So Kate, a poll as a primer, in a poll, you could ask things like, to what degree do you agree with the following statement? Let me give you an example. Measurement of philanthropy is impossible. And what? So if you say, do you agree or disagree? To what degree? And then asking people in the meeting, how did you guys answer this question? Let's talk about measurement and philanthropy. You'll start to calibrate people's thinking, and you'll start to notice where the most important part of the discussion needs to begin. So asking provocative statements can be really helpful in a polling manner. Other statements like, what are we doing now that you think demands a fresh approach? What are some of the biggest challenges that we're noticing?
Beautiful. So, and for me, I think sometimes like these platforms, these webinar platforms have a poll function embedded in them, right? So that we can put the poll up, and then everyone who's logged into the meeting can actually see kind of how the group as a whole is feeling around these possible subtopics, right?
Yes.
And so then people are kind of engaged, right? And then the second is the question from Olivia about what do we mean when we say pair share?
Thanks, Olivia. So a pair share means kind of what it sounds like. You go into pairs and you talk. And so it's when you're facilitating, it sounds like turn to a partner and answer this question. What is the biggest challenge, or what opportunities are you noticing? And then you say, I'm going to give you 4 minutes for the two of you to have a conversation, and then we're all going to come back together. So that's a pair share, and it's something that can be really helpful to get people grounded, especially people who are introverts who may not really like speaking in front of a group larger than 5, and so they can get their ideas talked out just in a small group. But I recommend always using a timer and always telling people how much time they have to chat.
Beautiful. It's interesting because I have certainly experienced that in a face-to-face meeting, but would not have thought necessarily to incorporate it into a virtual meeting space. But why not, right? You could. So there's been a number of comments and questions now starting to kind of bubble in, which segue beautifully to our next question, which is around people being really keen to have you share some of your favorite tools and methods for some of these online meeting, some of the technological solutions that you like to play with. So can you give us a demo?
Yeah, let's do that. I think, Duncan, let's skip to the next slide and head over to the slide that talks about tools, and then we'll go to the one that talks more about engagement. So I just want to talk to you about a couple tools and a couple platforms. Let's go back to the tools slide, the one that says Google Drive and Mural. And usually in virtual meetings, I will send everybody to a document where we will all edit together, or I'll send folks to Google Slides and we'll all view together. The reason we're not doing that
in the chat box then, and people can just go grab it?
Well, the reason we're not doing it today is if I send everybody to the same specific Google, it'll crash it. So I learned this in preparing for our day today that 10 people can edit at a time, 50 people can view, and about 200 people can be on a platform without it just kind of getting gummed up and slow. So we're not going to overwhelm a Google slide today.
They're saying thank you, I think.
I would have loved to, but it wouldn't have been a very good promotion for the work because it would have just been kind of gummed up and slowed down. So I'm assuming everybody knows about Google Drive. Let me just tell you a little bit about Google Drive, and then we'll talk about Mural and some email marketing stuff. So some of the tools. Google Drive. In fact, I would say I rarely use PowerPoint, and I rarely screen share. I just build a Google slide deck and I send people over to it, and I say, please meet me on slide 2. Please meet me on slide 5. And so that boosts the engagements. Folks actually have to click, they have to navigate, and there's no secrets here. There's no kind of white glove behind the curtain secret. Everybody's just there looking at the document. And so also the beauty of Google Slides is you can assign everybody a slide, and you can say, please, write your thoughts here, or design something or draw something for me, and then we can all look at each other's slides. So everybody sort of has their own little sandbox with Google Slides. Same thing with Google Docs. You can kind of create lists together. And so the reason I really like Google is that it's been around a long time. Most people have access to it. It has public links, which means you don't have to sign up or sign in. You can put the settings so that anybody can access and edit together. And I'm looking at this question from Teresa. Google Docs. Are there confidentiality concerns with using Google Docs? Teresa, I would say what I've learned is that some organizations, especially government organizations, may have some confidentiality concerns with Google Docs, but also that most governments don't know why. Like, they don't know how to handle it. So that's something specifically for your organization. Does Google retain ownership? They may, and I guess the question is, does that matter? So I don't know what field you're working in specifically, but it is a pretty remarkable tool, and I'd love to invite you to one of my trainings where we actually give it a try. So that's the short story on Google Talks. Let's talk about Mural. Duncan, will you stick that Mural link in the chat? So this link is not to a specific Mural board, but just to the tool itself. And this one has a significantly steeper learning curve, but it's also remarkable in what's possible. And there was a previous question about templates, and Mural comes with lots of templates, lots of previously created templates. And what Mural operates as is a big online whiteboard space with the ability to put boxes, areas, Post-it notes, circles, texts. You can actually attach documents. And they have some beautiful webinars. In fact, I encourage you just go to YouTube and listen in and watch one of their webinars. There's voting, there's chat, there's timers. You can have people sign in so you know who did what. I have planned whole conferences remotely using Mural, and am amazed at what's possible. But again, a little bit more of a learning curve. and one that with too many users on, I think the site can kind of lag a little bit. But they are an ever expanding tools and one of the most sophisticated free services I've seen with public links as well.
So what's too many for Mural?
That's a good question. I think I'd have to look and I'd have to Google that and see.
Okay. Yeah.
I think too many might be around 50.
Okay. Good.
I think that's probably too many anyways in terms of trying to do something productive where everybody has a say in something like Mural. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay.
So this last tool, email marketing, it sounds kind of simple, but with email marketing tools like Constant Contact or MailChimp, you have the ability to do your priming in a way that is timed, clear, beautiful looking, in the sense that you can schedule emails. So you can schedule those emails that say, our meeting is starting in an hour. You can schedule the email that shows up 5 minutes after the meeting ended with your exit survey or your follow-up tasks. Those tools have been really helpful for me, even with small groups, even with groups of 12. It's where I send a week before the meeting, I can send, here is a video on how to use Zoom. Here's some things you might need. Here's a test call. So a lot of the support that maybe new users might need, they have access to making sure their sound and video is set up properly and that they can just feel successful. And then I also have the view of who opened each email. So I can see, was this email read? How much engagement am I getting from this group? Might I need to email people individually because I haven't read the messages? So I've been using that quite a bit as well.
That's really interesting because I think it is maybe another advantage of working in online spaces like this is the data we can collect around how many people showed up, how many people downloaded pieces, how many people did whatever, right? Which we can't get a handle on as tangibly in a face-to-face meeting where we're all kind of sitting around the table, right? Very good. There's lots of interesting questions here specifically about particular platforms, and I know you were going to touch on platforms specifically. I wonder if that might be where we go next.
Yeah, let's look at that.
In terms of whiteboards and the functionality of Skype versus GoToMeeting versus Zoom.
Exactly. So there's a couple of different things to consider. I'm going to give, also going to give Duncan this link. If you don't mind pushing this link to folks. This is a quick article that was written earlier this year just about the comparisons between different platforms. And so it's a good primer to consider different platforms. But I'll tell you what I've settled on and what I've noticed. Zoom has become really the premier platform and the one that I use always for online meetings. And it's because of the feature of breakout rooms. And I saw a question earlier kind of asking how the breakout room functions. And let me explain it now. Zoom, you can create kind of a cyber room where you're all in a call together and you can see everybody's faces. And then you can, as the host, you can create a breakout room and you can put people in groups of 2 or groups of 4 or 8 or whatever. And you can put them in a space where it's just them and another person. And you can have your iPhone and you can time how long they're there and you can close the breakout room and bring everybody back together. So it's while you may be in a virtual space where everybody's face is there and there's kind of, you need to keep quiet and there's some awkwardness about when to talk. When you're in a breakout room, it's just you and 1 or 2 other people and you can have a deeper conversation. And so Zoom is, I think GoToMeeting has this feature, but they only have 6 breakout rooms. Skype doesn't have breakout rooms, but Zoom does. And to me, that is a game-changing feature that is at this point worth really migrating to Zoom, and until those other platforms catch up. That is, I just would never run a meeting without some kind of pair share, some kind of turn and talk, and Zoom makes that possible. Zoom also has some great features. They have a webinar function. They've got a lot of cool little settings in terms of, a virtual waiting room, so that you can all start together. People log on and they're in a waiting room until the meeting's really ready to start. It does have screen share and polling. I tend to use those a lot less because the connection can get jumpy when you're doing too much screen sharing. And I'm trying to think, Zoom is just, it seems the easiest to learn. Like the visual space and the controls are actually quite simple. So I'm really liking Zoom. Some people ask about Skype. Skype seems to be, Skype got in early. I think that they made big organizations sign long contracts with them. And so Skype and Microsoft, a lot of my government clients are really locked into Skype. But there is a way to sign into Zoom via Skype. In fact, Skype has video and group meeting functions, but it doesn't have great breakout rooms. And so I tend to just not use it. It feels like a huge hindrance to me. So I'm not advocating that you use a variety of platforms. Becky, Adobe Connect, yes, they do breakout rooms, but I think they also limit them. And I found the Adobe Connect platform to be crowded, too much happening, confusing, like just too many things going on. So there's a simplicity to Zoom that I'm just really interested in. And they take feedback. The company is interested in feedback, and they're quite affordable, actually. I think my pro account is $15 a month. And I do everything I need to do with that.
And I'm just noticing Lydia posted to our chat that, in fact, they use Zoom and find it very usable for both blind and sighted staff, which is another consideration, right? Someone else is asking about WebEx as a platform. Do you have any familiarity with that, Maggie?
Not that I know of. I don't think I've ever used WebEx. I've never facilitated. I may have participated in WebEx.
Good. Okay. So for you, certainly one of the things I've heard very clearly is a platform for you in considering and evaluating different platforms, the capacity to have a breakout room to be able to do those online virtual pair shares or small group dialogues is really key, because you're really thinking not so much as using online spaces to present material, but really how do you get people to think together and engage together around topics, right? So you're kind of saying it's the same as a face-to-face meeting, and you're looking at a platform that gives you that versatility.
Precisely.
Yeah. Any other considerations? Obviously, you've mentioned cost being one, and then obviously you've had to do some workarounds because certain larger clients may have restrictions. Anything else in your experience in evaluating or considering different platforms that is top of mind? You said ease on your end in terms of setup and learning and that kind of stuff, for sure.
I think other considerations are, just the simplicity of the interface. There's just such a wide range of the speed at which people can learn new tech tools. And I would say there's also there can be a lot of resistance and fatigue at learning more new tech tools. And Zoom, I feel like, is quite learnable, and there are and there's a lot of resources there. And so consider that I think it's quite learnable, and if you have to support some of your meeting users to just learn the platform before they can even function in the meeting space, because you don't want to spend your meeting solving someone's tech problem or their tech confusion. Right. You want to spend your meeting and talking about what's really there, and you want the tech platform to fall into the background and really just be about human connection and the work you're there to do. And so that's something to consider, and that's what, when I investigated Adobe Connect, I just thought, okay, yeah, I guess it's got all the same features as Zoom, but I just don't like how it operates. I don't like how tiny my face is. I don't like how there's all these other controls. And there was just too many bells and whistles that I frankly was never going to use. And it just seemed like my participants, there's nothing worse than being on this side and someone on that side says, I can't see you guys and I don't know what button to push. And they get really overwhelmed. It's really hard to have a meeting. So.
Right. I really like that as sort of like a criteria to think about, because sometimes more is not better, right? You know, how you want to make it easy for people to do this and not have to overcome lots of people's varying technical challenges that get in the way of the meeting, because it's hard to predict who's going to have those and when. Lots of questions about video and whether or not putting people on video helps kind of mitigate against people tuning out or not being engaged, that kind of thing, and or how it affects the overall quality on the platform for everyone.
Great. Yeah, let's Duncan, let's go to the slide that's about fostering connection online. We can look at that together. So let's talk about fostering connection online, and video is a key function of that. And so I like to call it bright faces on camera, or hair and makeup, so to speak. So in the same, as much as maybe we like to joke that at a virtual meeting you could do it in your pajamas, I don't recommend that you do. This is still real work, and you need to present yourself as you would, you know, in the workplace. And so I'm very firm in my pre-emailing before virtual meetings saying you need to have your camera on, and you need to have, you know, your sound needs to be good. I want you to test all of this. But bright faces, I've noticed, especially in the platforms where all our faces are lined up, you know, kind of like the Brady Bunch. If there's too many people on the meeting, the faces get smaller, and then maybe there's pages of faces. So I've noticed, especially on Zoom, that 16 people is about as big as I want to go for a meeting where we really need to get some work done. And because you need to see eyes and you need to see facial expressions, and people can put thumbs up and thumbs down, and they can shake their head, and there can be just as much of that body language connection that we have in the live space as we have in the virtual space. And it's really, really important. Another thing about that body language is sometimes it's meeting etiquette to mute yourself out if you're not talking, which is great if you have children or a barking dog, or maybe your partner is looking for a cup of coffee and you're in a home environment, there might be some noise. Yeah, muting out can be really good to keep the space quiet. However, when you mute out, we miss all of the little hmms and giggles and just the small ways that people listen, you know, where people say, oh yeah, and so some of that is lost. And so I'd say it's up to you to really decide, should everybody be on mute? You know, can we all unmute and really sense into one another better without being muted out, unless it's absolutely necessary, if someone's coughing or if they, you know, their phone is ringing and whatnot. So there's all those little small things, but I find that they make quite a big difference. We talked a little bit about breakout room. We talked a lot about breakout rooms. So that to me is just, that fosters a lot of connection if you can talk to a bunch of different people in the group, and it tends to make people behave better in meetings as well if they feel connected to the people around them. Introductions and priming. So introductions, doing some breakout room impromptu networking can be really helpful to fostering connection. You can do a lot of introducing of people who are going to be there even before the meeting starts. Give the list of names, give you know, as much as who they are, profile photos and whatnot, especially if the group is new. So when it comes to priming and introductions, you just have to ask yourself, you know, what is the ice that needs to be broken? Is it that they don't know each other's names? Is that we haven't talked about this topic before? You know, what is it that we really need to wade into together, and think really critically about how you can support people before you even get there. Another way to foster connection in the visual spaces is usernames. So I think my name is showing up. It's got my name and it's got the name of my company, Lead Groups Better. I can also put the name of the city I'm calling in from. People really like to see where everybody's calling from. It's like one of the exciting parts of being in the virtual space, and it's exciting to see people from different continents and from different time zones. So I just changed my name. I'm in Seattle, Washington. So now you may be noticing that you have a different association with me. Maybe you know somebody in Seattle. So playing around with usernames, you can change where you're calling from, what your role is in the project. Maybe if you're in an interagency, you can say what organization you're representing that day. These are all ways. It functions a little bit like a name tag. If someone on their name tag wrote their name and their organization, or their name and their city, we can relate to them in all kinds of ways. So experiment with usernames. Usernames can be really powerful, and they're important. So sometimes when people log in, it has a generic username, like maybe it's their initials or the name of their organization. Most platforms you can change it, and I encourage you to do that. So
beautiful. You're getting lots of great posts validating a lot of what you're saying as well. I know I'm laughing because Janice made a comment about how, because she lives rurally, and is plagued with the internet challenges that only other rural folks would know and love, that giving folks an option of both dialing in or connecting in online is always helpful. And I'm smiling because, Janice, you don't know this, but I was supposed to have a video face right up next to Maggie's. And the reason that that you're not seeing my face, you're just hearing my voice, is for exactly that reason. I happen to live rurally, and it just gets really laggy sometimes and affects the overall quality. So what I'm loving is, there's some good ground rules you're giving us, and then we have to experiment, right? We have to kind of adapt for the realities of the group that we're meeting with and how we kind of juggle that. We have lots of time, and folks certainly aren't being shy, but if there are more questions, please keep shooting them in. One really good one, maybe, if I can bring this forward, Melissa is asking, have the tools that you've been talking about, have you found them helpful, useful for groups of 20 to 60 people? And what would you recommend, because obviously there are some kind of platforms or tools that might be better suited for a smaller group versus a larger group. How does your thinking shift when you're designing a virtual meeting depending on the size of the group?
Great. Yeah, let's talk about that. And also there's some questions from earlier in the hour about managing people's participation, the problem of people talking over one another. And then I saw another one that's like, how do you blend, right? What if some people are live, some people are on Zoom? How does that all work together? So let's talk a little bit about some of those
Beautiful.
things.
Yep.
Melissa, specifically, groups of 20 to 60 people, what would I recommend? I would say if you're in 20 to 60 people, you are going more towards a webinar as opposed to a meeting. And you may want to... How
would you make that distinction?
I would make that distinction because managing 60 people's responses needs to be done in a very structured way that probably uses a tool. It probably uses a tech tool like a poll, because you really want to see where people are responding. If you put 60 people on a mural or a Google Doc, you're going to crash it, and it'll be very frustrating for those users because there's not enough space. And if they're having a problem, and if you're the only facilitator, if 60 people, if 20 people have a problem, if 5 people have a problem, you don't have a lot of time to tend to those questions, those specific questions. So if it's 60 people, they better be really trained up on how to use that tool. Or you might want to go to a more of a webinar platform, which unfortunately really gives me a lot of power and control, and you guys don't have a lot of power and control. You're just sort of passive listeners. But there's a reason we do that, because you're easier to organize that way. But more in the 20-person, I think 20-person Zoom has a webinar and a meeting, so I would go more Zoom meeting. You can manage 20 people. I do trainings all the time with 20 people. The faces don't get too small. After a certain amount of people and a certain screen size, you have 2 pages of faces. which is hard to feel like you're seeing everybody. And in the same way that we feel more connected in a room when we're sitting in a circle because we can actually see every face versus theater style, you want to try to see everybody's faces on the virtual platform. You'll feel it'll change things. It'll change how people know who's there. They'll keep track of who contributed what. You'll have a more connected group if you can manage it that way. So those are some of the thresholds in terms of what platforms will get crashed after a certain amount of users if you're going to go to some external platforms like Google or Mural or any kind of online whiteboard spaces. Polling software usually handles hundreds, so that may be more of your friend. You want to use that creatively. So that's my response in terms of the number. Also, as a facilitator, the number 16 is beautiful because groups of 2, groups of 4, groups of 8, and then you're in 16, and you can do a lot of idea sorting that way. Let's talk about the blended scenarios. These are really difficult. When people say, some of us are meeting, some people couldn't make the meeting, so they're coming in via Zoom. The reason it's difficult is not everybody's equalized. The people on Zoom can't really see the people in the room very well because usually the camera's in the corner and the sound isn't very good. The people in the physical room, why would they pay attention to a computer when there's live humans in the room? So it's really hard to get the two to interact. So usually when folks come to me with this problem, I really push them and I say, can you just get everybody online then? If 50% of the people can be in the room and 50% have to be online, make the people who are there physically go to their computers and meet everybody online, because then everybody's equalized and everybody has the space and you can all interact in the same manner. And so I would make the folks who are there defer to the folks who can't be there. And then you all equalize. So that's answer number 2. Answer number 1 is try to make everybody in the same space, whether it's virtual or not. Answer 2 is then move them. And then I'd say the next thing is then employ a facilitator who is tending to the Zoom or the online people and lodging the questions to the folks live in the room and vice versa. So you're actually managing 2 meetings simultaneously. But then every participant you're going to get the most out of that. So you actually want to probably have 2 facilitators and then pause and take time to make the two spaces interact. Pause and take time for live questions to be told to the virtual folks to give their questions, and then some interaction. And then you can take time for sharing and share outs and folks. So that's my answer. It's unideal, and yet it happens all the time that we're really trying to build platforms. Yeah. And then there was this question from earlier in the hour about handling equitable participation. And I hope now, if you explore some of these tools, you'll find that, let me just say this, we have a lot of rules sometimes in our workplaces about, step up, step back, or if you talk a lot, don't talk so much. And if you don't talk so much, try to talk more. And those only go so far, I feel like, if you're really relying people to self-regulate that way. And you should really look to your meeting design for that regulation to happen. And that means that people have equal opportunities and equalized opportunities to interact and to share. And that those come from how we structure. So again, pair sharing gives everybody a chance to express their thoughts and let their thoughts be known to others. Timers work really well in that way. You're going to talk in a pair, and I'm going to give you 4 minutes to talk, and then I want to hear what everybody had to say. Google Slides is great. Everybody has their own space, to their own sandbox to play in. Mural can be the same thing. You can give everybody an area. And I find that folks who maybe don't feel as articulate or as brave to speak in front of a group may perform beautifully in a virtual space. They have a completely different intelligence they can express, and they may be quite nimble there and feel better typing their thoughts, or maybe they want to be anonymous and where the thoughts come out. And there's ways to protect the people being anonymous in those online spaces, depending on how you do the share permissions. So that's a big question that was asked about how do you manage people talking over other people. It runs deep, and I'd love to share more. If you want to get in touch with me, we can talk a lot more about it. That's a very common problem I work with people around. Mm-hmm.
So one really interesting question, because someone posted a link about doing a virtual annual general meeting, and
Mm-hmm.
so someone else kind of posted related to that. Do you have any suggestions for how you would structure formal voting?
Formal voting. Oh
During,
yeah, I
like
see that there.
voting, getting people to vote on
Oh.
options or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
mean, polling would come to me as one possibility, because then it's transparent and people can all see how people are weighing in and how many people have weighed in. But are there
Mm-hmm.
other experiences that you have, Maggie, around that
I
specifically?
I also would say polling, especially. I mean, those important meetings don't tend to be very large in the sense that the people who have decision making power are usually a group of 12 or 9. And so I would say, yeah, using a polling software, if you for ease, that it's just a click. Um,
Mhm.
Otherwise, you can do it orally like you would in a group, and you can record what happened in a chat, or you can ask people to to type in their answer. So I think there's lots of ways to build a way to interact around that. That could be, yeah, polling software in Google.
Using the
Even
chat
Google
box even, right?
Documents. Yeah, Google Documents, like you can fill in a square if you're, green, red, or yellow to indicate all kinds of status around different items. And that's an easy, just like fill in a graph tool as well. So, mhm.
Beautiful. So I think we have time maybe for one more question. There's one about, and maybe I'm going to blend two of these questions together because they're somewhat related.
Mhm.
Rachel is wondering about what's new or innovative in the field in terms of new methods and technologies for virtual meetings that you're watching or are curious about. And then someone else specifically asked about you commenting on your thoughts with respect to Google Hangouts.
Mhm. Okay. So let's talk about Google Hangouts. Google Hangouts, as I experience it, I just used it the other day because it seems sometimes it works better for folks overseas. I was chatting with someone in the Middle East, and Google Hangouts was really accessible to her. I haven't used it in a while, and so I think that it's got some video capability. You can send links and do some chats as well. It doesn't save chats that I know of, or at least I don't know how to operate it. So I that's about as much as I know. I would encourage you to explore what features does Google Hangouts give me, and the features you want to look for are accessibility, video. It probably has a good simplicity to it because that's how Google is. Can you record things? Can you launch different components? What does the interface look like when there's more than 5 people on it? Those are all things that I would practice. You'll find if you can get people who are also curious about this work to play with you, like to say, let's all meet online and let's all practice these different platforms together and see what we're going to learn. I think that will be the best way for you to make decisions about what to adopt for yourself or your organization or for certain meetings in those platforms. Mm-hmm. I like Zoom because it also has a scheduling feature. It talks to my Google Calendar, and so all those links for the call and whatnot can be scheduled quite easily. So that's my thoughts about Google Hangouts. And in terms of emerging technologies, Mural continues to blow my mind as an amazing technology. I've compared it to I think onlinewhiteboard.com was one that I really looked into, but they didn't offer the
Skype
public links.
Whiteboard was another one someone mentioned, I
Skype
think.
Whiteboard, yeah.
Yeah.
There's just so many features to Mural that are embedded, and the icons and the arrows. I mean, it just what happens is actually quite beautiful and usable afterwards. So and there's voting and commenting, and it can go so many layers deep and quite wide. So I just really that's the one to look at if you're looking to really up your game. And then I just keep talking to Zoom. I mean, my group of professionals is talking to Zoom a lot, trying to get them to change a few features and increase some of the capabilities of certain features. And Zoom is in conversation with people like us. So I'm anxious to see if they're going to take more and more recommendations to make their platform even more nimble. So those are the things that I would look for. Mm-hmm.
Well, can you believe our hour is almost up, Maggie? Thank you so much for giving your time so generously. I think what I've really valued and my big takeaway from this conversation is, really giving the same mindfulness and to the design and structure and instructions in a virtual meeting that you would for a face-to-face. Just because it's on a platform, don't rely on the technology to help you organize people, in a way that you wouldn't if it was just showing up in a room. So that's been certainly my big takeaway. And thank you so much. I know we're going to follow up with more, but I'm going to turn it over to Duncan to wrap us up and tell us what comes next and how to find you again.
Thanks, Sylvia. And thanks, Maggie, for joining us. Lots of really great feedback on your advice, both from like a principled perspective, but also just really practical things. People really appreciate having those. If you're curious about learning more about Maggie and her work and what she can do for you, I highly suggest heading to maggiechumbley.com. We're going to put that link into the chat box. It'll also be included in the post-webinar email that you'll get tomorrow. Maggie, can you give us like a quick kind of 30 or 60 seconds pitch about your work and how people can get involved with you?
Yes, definitely. So my work is really about facilitation. So whether that's being your facilitator and helping you launch something, get through something, process something, and you need someone in there who knows a lot about it and an expert to help you through it. I'm your gal for that. But on the other side, I can help you learn to do that. So the other kind of feature of what I'm offering is training and support on how to have great virtual meetings and how to have great meetings, live meetings. And so that's an offering that I do now. So if you go to my website where it says courses and trainings, there's a number of things there. There's great virtual meetings. And right now, if you have a group or your organization and you want to get some people together to set up a training with me, it's about 2 hours. It's like a fire hose. There's no break. I just go through even more, trying out the tools, practicing the tools, talking about how we design meetings, as well as what are some of the technical moves that you need to make to use these platforms. So it's a great mix of tech as well as facilitation technique that can help foster a great virtual meeting. So that'd be a great place to start if you learn some things here that you really want to learn more about. Is get in touch with me via my contact page. And if you can think of your organization or maybe a group of organizations that it would benefit if you all learn together, that'd be a great place to start.
Perfect. We also do have one more opportunity for anyone on the call today. The Tamarack Institute is hosting the Community Change Festival from September 30th to October 3rd in Vancouver, BC. And that's our marquee learning event for the year. And we're inviting you to come join us in Vancouver and celebrate community change work being done all across Canada and the US, and to take a deeper dive into the 5 interconnected practices that we see as essential for community change. And those are on the screen here. They're evaluating impact, collective impact, community engagement, leadership, and community innovation. So you can learn more about the Community Change Festival at tamarackcommunity.ca or on the link on the screen. As well, in a few days, you'll receive a follow-up email, which will include a link to the full recording of today's call, as well as the learning opportunities I've just mentioned and any of the links that we've shared today throughout the presentation. To learn more about upcoming learning opportunities, including workshops and free webinars like this one, you can visit us at tamarackcommunity.ca. We also encourage you to take a minute to complete a short webinar survey to offer feedback on how you enjoyed today's call. The link is on your screen, and we'd really love to hear from you. Thanks again to you, Maggie and Sylvia, for joining us today, and I hope everyone has a wonderful week.